All right, we move on to the book of Proverbs tonight. We want to look at the Proverbs. And the author is celebrated as Solomon. He's credited with writing most of the book. He gathered Proverbs from other people as well as writing his own. According to 1 Kings 4 and verse 32, he wrote 3,000 Proverbs and 1,005 songs. So Solomon was quite a prolific writer and even musician writing the songs. In the Proverbs itself, in these 31 chapters, there are only 917 Proverbs. So it just gives us a glimpse of the wisdom and the brilliance of Solomon. Chapter 30 is the work of Agur, and so you're going to see that heading when you get to chapter 30. And chapter 31 is attributed to Lemuel. It says written by Lemuel, and Lemuel, by the way, is perhaps another name for Solomon. We don't know for sure, but it might be. The date was during Solomon's reign, which was 971 to 931 BC. And so all of these were compiled during that time period. We're going to say our key verse is Proverbs 1:7. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and instruction. That's one that we would take to heart, that wisdom is the beginning of knowledge. Now, Proverbs should be to our practical life what Psalms is to our devotional life. In other words, we have the Psalms to lead us in devotion to the Lord, and the Proverbs are very practical. They are very practical for our daily living because they give us advice, give us direction. Proverbs is a book of wisdom that is to be applied to our earthly conditions. It is to be applied to our everyday life. Virgil Hensley wrote in Through the Bible in 1 Year, Proverbs are short statements drawn from long experiences. That's a pretty good way to remember that. Proverbs are short statements drawn from long experience. You've lived long. Solomon had. He had lots of experience, and so he could write these short statements to give direction. Solomon the sage addresses issues of life that are not directly covered by the law and the prophets. And so he adds some things that will help us in life. He conveys to us the fact that righteous living flows out of a right relationship with God. Righteous living flows out of a right relationship with God. And that's what he wants us to focus on, the righteousness of God and the relationship that we have with him. The central message of the book is the wisdom of God. You see the wisdom of God all over the pages of the Proverbs. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:30 that Christ is our wisdom. And so in a way you could say when you read the Proverbs, you're going to see Christ. You're going to see the wisdom of Christ. You're going to have the understanding of who he is and how he helps us in facing everyday life. There's a recurring thought that seems to be the promise of Proverbs, and that is that those who live according with wisdom that produces obedience to God, those who live with that wisdom that produces obedience to God, they are going to prosper, they'll experience joy, they'll live longer, and they will receive the temporal goodness of God. All of those things are there, and they are the byproduct of a life that is lived in obedience to God. There is a reminder, though, that we need to remember the general principles are balanced. Sometimes the wicked temporarily prosper. We've seen that. You can go back to Psalm 73 and how David saw that the wicked prospered and he didn't really think that it was fair. And sometimes in life, the wicked do prosper. They get along sometimes a lot better than we do. But remember, too, that Job reminds us, as well as the Proverbs, that occasionally the righteous and the godly suffer. Yes, the wicked sometimes prosper, they rejoice, and sometimes the righteous suffer, but then there are other times that it reverses, and the righteous rejoice and the wicked suffer. Now, the book is set up in a little structure, a simple structure. Chapters 1 to 7 give us wisdom and folly. There is fatherly counsel with warnings about not acting wisely, and there are exhortations to wisdom at all cost. He says, I want you to attain wisdom. I want you to gain wisdom. Get wisdom with all your heart. Get wisdom and understanding. So no matter what it costs you, he wants us to get wisdom. Chapters 8 and 9 give us wisdom's call. In chapters 8 and 9, Solomon kind of personifies wisdom, gives wisdom like a personal character, and describes her virtues as she calls to men. These virtues of holiness and godliness and righteousness and faithfulness and obedience and love for the Lord. So we want to see those virtues as she calls to all men. Chapters 10 to 24 are the Proverbs of Solomon. Chapters 25 to 29, we'll say, are the Proverbs of Solomon compiled by the men of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, Hezekiah, Hezekiah. Chapters 25 to 29, the descendants of Hezekiah, the men who worked with him. Chapter 30, we mentioned again the words of Agur, that's A-G-U-R, the words of Agur, which gives instruction. And then chapter 31 is godly advice to a son. Godly advice to a son. It is there in Proverbs 31 that you see not only the advice to a son, where he starts out saying, don't get drunk with wine, don't look at, all of that. But he goes on to describe for him a virtuous woman that would be a blessing to his son. Let's look at the form of Proverbs, because they are, it's sort of interesting the way they're put together. The book contains short statements. Some of them are repeated. Some of them are given to us by contrast. Some of them are given to us by comparison. And so that's called parallelism. And there's three types of parallelism we're going to look for. One is synonymous parallelism, which simply means that the second clause restates what was said in the first clause. For example, Proverbs 19 and verse 29 is a demonstration of this synonymous parallelism. 19 verse 29. Judgments are prepared for scoffers, and blows for the back of fools. So it's saying the same thing twice, but in just a little bit different way. Synonymous parallelism, restating it. Then you have contrast parallelism. The second truth that is mentioned is stronger by contrasting it with an opposite truth. You make a statement and it becomes stronger when it has that second statement added to it. It's an opposite truth. Proverbs 13 and verse 9 is an example of that, where it says, the light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked goes out. You see the opposite? The light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked goes out. So that's contrast parallelism. And then there's completive parallelism, which is the second phrase develops the first phrase. It develops the first thought and, kind of works it out. For example, Psalm 20 or Proverbs 20 and verse 2 is an example of this completive. It makes a development. Proverbs 20 and verse 2, the terror of the king is like the growling of a lion. He provokes him to anger, or he who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life. So he's building on this. He's developing a theme. And the first is the terror of the king is like a growling lion. And if you provoke him to anger, it's going to be even worse. You're going to forfeit your life. So there's the development of that completion in the parallelism. So those forms, synonymous, contrasting, and completive. It's just interesting to see how he plays those out. There's spiritual value in the Proverbs, of course. Since the Proverbs were included in the Scriptures by the Holy Spirit, we have to conclude that there is more spiritual value in reading these than just listening to the Proverbs of men. I mean, Aesop has given us some Proverbs, and others have given us Proverbs, Mark Twain, and men of that like. But these are given to us to teach us. They are given to us to instruct us. And many of the Proverbs are going to conflict with, or they are going to refute the Proverbs of men. And so therefore these Proverbs are profitable to us. There's a lot of wisdom in these sayings, and they can benefit our lives very richly. The Proverbs address every relationship of man. And I've kind of broken that down for you. Man's relationship with God, all of those listed there deal with that relationship. Man's relationship to himself, and you've got all of those listed. And then man's relationship to others, and you've got all of them. Now just for a minute, turn to Proverbs 1. And let's look at verses 1 to 7, which is the beginning of the Proverbs, but it really sets the tone for the entire book. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. And he's basically saying, here's why I'm writing all this. Here's why I'm collecting these Proverbs. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Verse 7 is an example of that contrast, parallelism. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so this really sets the tone for us and gives us an idea of what we are to be pursuing as we read through the book of Proverbs. And there's so much wisdom in there. And there's not a lot of time to do this, but in chapter 2, in verses 12 to 16, for example, he gives to us, chapter 2, verses 1 to 6, he gives us these descriptions. Receive my words, the treasure of my commandments, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. If you do all that, basically, he says you're going to be much better off. In chapter 5, verses 1 to 6, just to be aware, he says, watch out for the adulterous woman. He says she calls to the weak, she calls to the simple, she calls to the unwise, and they fall into her trap. So watch out for that. A favorite verse is 27 to 17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. This is just an encouragement to us in Proverbs 27:17 that we are to encourage one another. We're to sharpen each other with the understanding of the word, with the wisdom of the word, and strengthen each other in our walk with the Lord. Now, just some interesting things to think of in the Proverbs as you read through. The phrase, the fear of the Lord, appears 14 times in the Proverbs, reminding us that it's important that we understand the fear of the Lord. And fear is not the fear of of the punishment that he will inflict upon us. It is the fear of offending him. And so therefore it is a reverence for him. It is a desire to please him. So that's the fear of the Lord. Chapter 6, 7 things the Lord hates. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, false witness speaking lies, feet swiftly running to evil, one who sows discord among the brothers. Those are things the Lord hates. And that's chapter 6, verses 16 to 19. Chapter 18, verse 21, health and life are in the power of the tongue. Now, what does that make you think of? Anybody have something that makes you think of? Life and death are in the power of the tongue. Yep. It runs you right to James chapter 3, where Paul talks about the fact, we stumble in many ways. No one can control his tongue. It's a fire set on fire by the fires of hell. And so this is the thing that we see that. Chapter 11, verse 30, he who wins souls is wise. This is our witness, our testimony to lead people to know the Lord. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Chapter 31, verse 30. That's just a blessing from the Lord if you have a woman who fears the Lord and loves him. And so we rejoice in that. So many good things in here for us. And I hope that as you skim through Proverbs, as you read through it, you will find great joy and instruction. And here is a verse for us, chapter 23 and verse 2. For when we come together on Wednesday nights, when you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider yourself carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are a man of great appetite. In other words, if you're a glutton, be careful. He's giving us wisdom to show some discernment, to show some discipline, even when it comes to our eating. I'm sorry if I offended anybody with Proverbs 23.